You're watching the Baggies Podcast YouTube channel. For match previews, match day vlogs, match reactions, and more, make sure to subscribe to the Baggies Podcast YouTube channel. Hello and welcome back to the Baggies Podcast YouTube channel, where of course we're giving you all the latest news, views and opinions on all things Albion. We're back again today with another deep dive on a new signing, that new signing being Jed Wallace, who has joined us on a free transfer. But for that, we need a bit of sort of Millwall insight. We want to get into Jed and a little bit about what he can bring to Albion throughout his time at the club. But for that, we're joined by Omer from That Millwall Podcast. Omer, firstly, how are you doing, mate?
Not too bad, Louis. Thanks for having me on, pal.
Yeah, absolute pleasure to have you here. First of all, what sort of stuff do you get up to over on That Millwall Podcast?
Sure. I mean, obviously, I guess quite similar to you boys. We've got obviously podcast that goes out a couple of times a week, and then a YouTube channel. Similar sort of thing, obviously, content going all over the place. And yeah, just obviously passionate people about our football club. So yeah, pleasure to be on and look forward to a little chinwag about our dearly departed.
And what sort of, how are you feeling really, Omer, going into the season? Because I know that you guys finished above us last season and sort of almost made it to the playoffs. How are you kind of, what are your thoughts ahead of the upcoming season?
Sure. So obviously we've got routed now, obviously 3 seasons we finished in the top half. We've been in the championship for 5 years, which is obviously quite good going through our kind of club of our stature, should I say. Typically we're kind of Championship League One, and that's kind of the repetitive tone. And the last time we was in the Premier Division, or the first division that we called it back then, was in the late 80s. So, I mean, going into the season, of course, we're ambitious. I mean, if you asked me this time a week ago, we hadn't signed anyone and we've lost players left, right and centre. And we put back to pre-season with only 12 players, 12 outfield players, shall I say. But we've made a couple of good statement signs, I feel like, in the last few days. And, you know, there's optimism kind of building around the place. It's too early, I think, to predict where we think we'll finish. But if we do better than what we did last season, then we're talking in the right conversation and in the right end of the table. So I'm sure the aspirations are quite similar for Brom and the Baggies in general.
Yeah, absolutely. We hope so. And we hope that your man, Jed Wallace, will be able to kind of help us with that. I know that you guys are a little bit upset about him leaving because he's been such a big part of, as you said, getting into that top half and kind of establishing yourselves as a championship club, especially in that top half as well. First of all, were you a little bit surprised to see him move to Albion? Because I've seen a few, fans say that you expected him to maybe go a bit higher. And of course, as I said, you finished above us last season. I think Burnley were interested as well and tried to make a bit of a late bid. Were you a little bit surprised?
A little bit, to be honest. I think at the time, we kind of knew probably this time last year, really, that if we were going to keep him, we'd have had an outstanding season and perhaps maybe been in the playoff picture last season in general and perhaps even got promoted. It's a bit of a tough one to take because he only had a year left on his contract last year. And it's the kind of conundrum. Do you sell a player? Because obviously, he was our talisman, let's have it frankly and honest, during COVID and obviously a couple of years before that, he's kind of been a folklore of our team and on the right side of the pitch, then moving into the kind of number 10 position last season, so to speak. Yeah, I mean, it was a shame to see him go. I think I kind of saw him potentially, I mean, he's 28 years of age, 29 later in the year. Did I really think he'd go to the Premier League? I think we always had the conversation that we saw him playing for the likes of Burnley under Sean Dyche in the Premier League, that sort of kind of outfit, because he's a hard-working player, quite efficient with what he does. Is he really top Premier League quality? I mean, we'll be biased and say we hoped he would have been and potentially could have been for us, but I'm not overly surprised to see him kind of stay in the Championship. I did maybe think, a Burnley might have picked him up, just been relegated with the parachute payments, or even a Norwich City or someone like that could offer him, a decent kind of wage. And I think obviously with West Brom, I'm sure he's probably on a bit more money than he would have been at Millwall anyway. So yeah, not overly surprised to him go West Brom, but I did think maybe the upper echelons of the Championship maybe might have been called in, so to speak, going into the season, so to speak. Yeah,
I thought when Burnley came in, I was surprised that he'd never played for Burnley before, is because, as you said, he'd be a fantastic fit for a Sean Dyche side, really. But if you don't mind, I'm going to sort of take you back to the 19-20 season, which was the same season that we ourselves got promoted in under Slaven Bilic, and we had Mateus Pereira, who I'm sure you'll have seen had a fantastic season that year and got some pretty decent numbers. But the only man in the Championship to top him for assists was Jed Wallace. How good was he back in that season for you?
Yeah, I think it was actually a tricky season we went into. I think, if I'm not mistaken, 1920, we just lost Neil Harris after about 7 or 8 games going into the season, who was our previous manager. And again, Harris brought in Wallace. We had him on 2 loan spells previous to that, signed him on a permanent a couple of years before. And he was linked away, I think, the season before to a move to Middlesbrough with George Saville in a doubles kind of transfer deal. So Saville went to Middlesbrough and Wallace decided to stay put. And then he signed a new contract, I think, going into that season. And he kind of kicked on from there, really. I think Harris left, Rarick came in and kind of made him the folklore of the team, really, and kind of the main go-to in our attack. I think he got 13 assists that season. You might have the statistics in front of me, but I think it was double goals, assists, goals and assists. I think 10 league goals, 13 assists. And, you know, he was obviously, it was a set piece threat in particular that season. He scored a couple of outstanding free kicks, both in in Wales come to mind. One against Cardiff, one against Swansea, and a couple of big goals in other games as well. And I think that year in particular, he kind of upped his game another level, really. I think he kind of got more effective, I suppose, and became more of an efficient footballer. At times, I think he kind of felt the pressure to kind of, when we were struggling the season before, to be our Ronaldo, if that makes sense, where he needs to take the game by the scruff of the neck and be the hero. I think that year in particular, 1920, he kind of found a more effective way of playing, especially that Christmas period that sticks in the memory. I think he just kind of knuckled his game down to the niches of just, you know, what he's good at, which was taking the player on, getting the ball into the box, but also then adding the end product of just being a kind of dynamic winger and getting in, you know, on the end of crosses, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned earlier about sort of a couple of different positions that he can play in. Where do you think that he's really best suited?
I think for me, he's a right-sided winger. That's like where I saw Jed is his best, was get him on the right, get him taking on a fullback, get him trying to make something happen, really. And obviously 13 assists that season. I think there's a few times that stick in memory where he's beat a man, put a ball in the box, and we have Matt Smith up front. And Matt Smith was, you know, the towering target man in the Championship. I think he scored at Albion that year, earlier in the season, if I'm not mistaken. And I think Jed Wallace kind of got a kind of good understanding with him in that sense. I think Smith scored, I think, was our top goal scorer that year. But also, down the right-hand side for me was where he kind of showed his best. In recent times, with the change of formation that we had last season in particular, he kind of found himself in the number 10 position, which is more than handy at the Championship level. But if you give Jed the ball in the boxes, leave him isolated, one-on-one. So I think he formed a good partnership, kind of, you know, a good understanding with Matt Smith. If you leave him on the right-hand side of the pitch, while it's isolated, one-on-one with a fullback, he seems to try and get the better of him and enjoys that kind of challenge. And his delivery from the wide areas, especially from free kicks, set pieces in general, he just kind of had a good knack of, you know, putting the ball in the right areas. And like I said, you know, he's a bit more of a dynamic winger in that sense, got forward that season more in particular and scored goals. Yeah,
absolutely. I remember that season in particular. Albion fans were all hoping that Pereira sort of beat Wallace, but I think, you know, assist-wise, Wallace got, I think, one more than him, which, you know, is a phenomenal season. I think one of the things that a lot of Albion fans have identified throughout his time at Millwall and sort of watching him back now is his set pieces. I think you mentioned a couple of free kicks there against the two Welsh teams. What sort of stuff can he offer from set pieces? I know that obviously Millwall are pretty effective from those sorts of areas. Has that been a big help for him?
Definitely. I think, you know, we've got a big tower in centre halves, and from set pieces, particularly corners, if you think on the left-hand side when he whips the ball inwards, he seems to be most effective at that. I think he seemed to work on his dead ball, because when we had him on loan the first couple of times from Wolverhampton Wanderers, he didn't really show that kind of end product from a set piece, like particularly obviously being a dead ball specialist, like to score a goal. But I think he kind of sussed the technique where he could get it up and over the wall, so to speak, and obviously into the top corner. One last season against Blackpool in our first win of the season sticks in the memory as well. Late in the game, you know, you kind of backed him to score a goal like that because he had that in his locker. And I think it's something he's really worked on. And I think that's what I think West Brom fans maybe might appreciate most about him. He'll constantly keep trying. He won't shirk away. He'll always try, and even if he's having a poor game, he'll always try and do what he thinks he's good at. And sometimes players might hide away in them scenarios, but he's matured into a kind of a real established Championship winger. And I think he will go well for you guys. I mean, be interesting to see if you do get promoted this year, whether he goes into Premier League with you boys. But I think, you know, he's effective at what he does, and he backs himself to do the job of what he can do.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen the free kick against Derby, I think, earlier in the season, which was sort of along the floor, really, and he sort of played it between the goalkeeper and defender, and it ended up going through all of them and through so many bodies and into the bottom corner. And I think that was pretty testament to sort of the technique that he's got to whip it into a certain area. What do you think are his best attributes, Omer, if you had to put your finger on that?
I'd say if you just leave him one-on-one, he's got raw pace. I mean, he's not the quickest player in the division, but, you know, if you leave him in the wide areas, like I say, you know, against a fullback, getting one-on-one. He's got a bit of a trick and a skill in him. He's not necessarily a flair player. But if you leave him one-on-one isolated with a fullback, he'll try and take the player on. And if you encourage him to keep doing that and the fans get behind him for that, I think you'll reap the rewards of it, and you'll see that more often than not. And obviously, like I said, set pieces are probably his main kind of forte. He's obviously was a penalty taker as well. So, I mean, I don't know who will be the penalty taker for West Bromwich Albion going into the season, but he does back himself, I think, from a dead balls position as well, and tends to have a good record from the penalty spot.
And finally, Omer, how much are you going to miss him? Because, as you mentioned, he's been your main talisman over the past few years. Can you see yourselves getting somebody in to kind of replace him as best you can? Or do you think it's just a case of everybody else chipping in to sort of replace his contribution?
I bloody hope so. I'll be honest. I think he's that sort of player where when he wasn't in the side, we missed him massively. And also at times when when the going was tough, you'd rely on him to kind of step up. And, we don't often have multi-million pounds to spend to replace a player like Wallace. I feel like a couple of years ago, after he got 13 assists and 10 goals, probably would have made £7-8 million for him. And it's a steal from West Brom to take him off us for nothing. I think, we've signed a couple of players in the window so far. We've signed a player from Holland, Sane Fleming, who got 12 goals for Fortuna Sittard last year in the Eredivisie. So 23 years old. We've not really dipped into the foreign market before. It's quite exciting. I think he's a bit more of a different player, but I think we'll miss him massively. But hopefully we get off to a good start to the season, and hopefully we'll quickly forget about it, because if we don't, then it will be, if only we kept Jed. That will be the story of the season, I feel like. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, we wish Millwall the best of luck with the season. But finally, Omer, before we let you go, what sort of stuff can we see over on That Millwall Podcast? Is there anything that's recent that's going on that you'd like to promote?
Yeah, we're doing a lot of kind of championship kind of interactions with other podcasts. So, we're trying to get kind of general content out there, but also just obviously more niche to our club. And, we do the typical podcast twice a week. And it's just general chit chat about Millwall. So if anyone's interested about Millwall from the West Bromwich Albion side, you're more than welcome to come over to our socials and check us out. We're at That Millwall Pod on Twitter. Drop us a follow, see what you think of us, and check our YouTube channel out as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll leave some links in the description for the podcast and for yourself, Omer. But a massive thank you for coming on today. We really appreciate it.
No problem, Louis. Thanks for having me, mate.
And that brings us to the end of this video, learning a little bit more about Jed Wallace, West Bromwich Albion's latest signing. Let's see if he can help boost Steve Bruce's side back into the Premier League. Make sure you leave your comments down below as to how you think he's going to do next season, and subscribe for more content like this. We'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.